The wall of silence has now been broken, and victims are coming forward.
A Texas lawyer promised that more than 100 lawsuits were coming down the pike for Sean Diddy Combs, and now he is starting to fulfill that promise. Tony Buzbee filed several complaints on behalf of 6 alleged Diddy victims on Monday, and the victim in one of those suits says he was just 16 years old when he claims he was groped during one of Diddy's infamous white parties. We've got the latest on these new, disturbing allegations of sexual assault. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. As 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs sits behind bars in Brooklyn, New York on federal sex crimes charges, people from all over the country have been reaching out to Texas attorney Tony Buzbee to put their claims against the rapper on the record. Now, at the beginning of this month, Buzbee announced that his firm had gotten thousands of phone calls with stories of sexual assault and mistreatment, and that he vetted more than 100 cases that they believed they could take to civil court. Now, during his news conference, Buzbee emphasized that Combs' alleged victim pool was vast, covering different ages and genders and races and locations.
You should know, in this group, it is evenly divided between males and females. There are 60 males and 60 females who have joined us to pursue these claims as plaintiffs. In this group, 62% identify as African American, 30% are white, and the remainder are Hispanic or Asian. The victims are from more than 25 states. The majority are from California, New York, Georgia, and Florida. Our youngest victim at the time of the occurrence was 9 years old. We have an individual who was 14 years old. We have one who was 15. 25 of the 120 individuals who are plaintiffs in these cases were minors at the time of the acts complained of. Most of these events and incidents occurred at parties, typically after parties, or album release parties, New Year's Eve parties, 4th of July parties, something they called a puppy party, the all-white party, although several of these events occurred at auditions. Many times, especially young people wanting to break into the industry, were coerced into this type of conduct in the promise of being made a star, or in the promise of having Sean Combs listen to their tape or even let them read for Sean Combs.
What a story, right? I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes what we cover here on Sidebar can be a lot to take in. And that's why I always like to just take a minute to talk about something else, something positive. And one of the things that I really love to tell you guys is I love to talk to you about our sponsor, Upside. This is an awesome product. So Upside is a free app that helps you get cash back when you buy gas, groceries, food. This is real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can then transfer straight into your bank account. It is so easy to use. Here, I used Upside to find a gas station. I claimed an offer, pay with my credit card at the pump, followed the steps on the app. Guess what? I got cash back. And you can use Upside at all different kinds of places, restaurants, convenience stores. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code SIDEBAR, and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Hope you can check it out. Now, Sean Combs is, of course, a Grammy-winning music producer, rapper, behind the record label Bad Boy Entertainment, the Sean John clothing label. He's been a staple in entertainment and music for years. But now, anytime you mention his name, really what it comes back to is that he is an indicted defendant in New York. He's an accused sexual predator. He's been charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution. Prosecutors allege that Combs used his power, his money, his influence to force employees, commercial sex workers, even unsuspecting women to facilitate and or participate in the now infamous freak-offs, described as hours-long sex performances that were usually recorded without the people's consent or knowledge and propelled by illegal drug use. But here's the thing. Prosecutors aren't the only ones making allegations against Combs, because we know that Combs was already facing a whole slew of civil lawsuits prior to this week, with a civil action that was filed by his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura in November of 2023. We believe that that was the lawsuit that really kicked everything into high gear, all the lawsuits, ultimately the criminal charges. And remember, Ventura claimed that during her on-again, off-again relationship with Combs, he forced her to partake in these freak-offs, to the point that everybody would need an IV drip to recover. Now, during his news conference, going back to attorney Tony Buzbee, he said to the public and the media, you should expect the first of more than 100 new civil lawsuits to be filed against Combs in the next 30 days. But what happened? The first 6 came much sooner than that. Now, as a note, Combs has adamantly denied any and all allegations, old and new. In a statement, Combs' legal team said that this is a clear attempt to get publicity. The attorney said they and Combs have full confidence in the facts, their legal defenses, and the integrity of the judicial process. In court, the truth will prevail that Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted anyone, adult or minor, man or woman. However, in his own statement Monday, Tony Buzbee said, quote, the Buzbee law firm, along with co-counsel AVA Law Group and New York local counsel Curris Law, is filing 6 cases this week alleging aggravated sexual assault, sexual abuse, and sexual exploitation against Sean Diddy Combs and those entities with whom he has been affiliated, to include in one case Macy's department store and in another Marriott hotels. The cases are being brought for conduct that occurred over a span beginning in 1995 through 2021. All of the events occurred in New York and are being filed pursuant to the Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act, which we'll talk about in a minute. 4 of the alleged victims in these cases are male, 2 are female. 1 was 16 at the time of the alleged occurrences. We will let the allegations and the filed complaints speak for themselves, and we'll work to see that justice is done. We expect to be filing many more cases over the next several weeks, naming Mr. Combs and others as defendants as we continue to gather evidence and prepare the filings. Okay, so with that, we're going to be focusing on one lawsuit. We're going to be focusing on the allegations being made by the now grown man who says that he was 16 when Combs assaulted him. He is identified only as John Doe in this lawsuit. And while there have been accusations in prior civil lawsuits that Combs engaged in inappropriate or even illegal behavior with minors, to be very clear about something, his federal criminal charges do not relate to children in any way. There is, of course, the chance that there will be a superseding indictment, meaning that prosecutors go back to the grand jury with evidence of additional crimes that may relate to minors, but we're not at that point. He's not being charged with respect to minors currently. Having said that, now let's go back to this lawsuit. Let's break it down. So the lawsuit that was filed in New York federal court begins. This case seeks compensatory and punitive damages for the sexual assault of a minor. Let me stop right there. So compensatory damages are, yes, to compensate a plaintiff for what happened to them, to make them whole again. Punitive damages are a way to punish the defendant for really egregious conduct. So we start there. The assault, which was part of a practice that defendant Sean Combs had of grooming or attempting to groom minors, occurred at what was termed a white party at Combs' residence in New York. The conduct described herein is shockingly typical of defendant Sean Combs. Combs was aided in his abhorrent conduct over the years by many individuals and entities. Sean Combs, for many years, believed he was above the law. He is not. First glance, practice, typical, conduct over the years, these terms, I imagine, will not only be a theme in this lawsuit, but the other lawsuits that are filed by Tony Buzbee. But it is also a common theme in the prosecutor's indictment, too, that there were these alleged repeated patterns of illegal conduct by Sean Combs. Now, some of the accusations that are made against Combs in this lawsuit, they really echo some of the overt acts that prosecutors have pointed to in their effort to make the case that Combs was running a criminal enterprise. So in this lawsuit, it reads, Combs is one of the wealthiest musical artists in the world. Behind the facade of being a 3-time Grammy Award winner, discovering and developing multiple famous musical artists, ranking on Forbes' list of the highest paid entertainers in the world, there existed something sinister, a dark underbelly of crime, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, bribery, and prostitution. This is almost verbatim in a way from the criminal indictment. It goes on to say that Combs is a menace to society, women, and children. While his wealth has kept him above consequence for years, Combs now faces the awesome power of the American judicial system and ultimately a jury of his peers who will be asked to punish him for the deplorable conduct described herein. Now, Combs isn't the only one that John Doe is suing in this lawsuit. Now, the lawsuit also names Daddy's House Recordings. This is a recording studio in New York. Combs Enterprises, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Productions, this is amongst others. And the reason is because, as they say, quote, Combs and his agents, employees, and contractors through these Combs businesses would tell victims, this is what it takes to be famous. What are you willing to do to become a star? And perform this sexual act or else, to coerce the victim into performing a non-consensual sex act for the gratification of Combs and his cohorts. Each of the Combs corporations aided and abetted Combs in committing the unlawful sexual violence against plaintiff described herein, are alter egos for Combs, completely dominated by him and used for his personal interest and to engage in wrongdoing which harm plaintiff and others, and or serve or have served as vehicles for Combs to move, dispose of, and or insulate his assets, including connection with his criminal activities, and to avoid compensating the victims of his many crimes, including plaintiffs. So big theme there that Combs had control over these entities. Sometimes we see these cases where corporations and business entities are trying to be held liable for the conduct of an employee or an associate. Sometimes the defense will be that this employee is not really an employee, is not acting within the scope of their employment, that there is a separation between the company and the defendant. Here, if you're saying he's in control of all these entities and is using these resources and assets for his benefit to perpetrate a crime, that argument becomes a lot more difficult. But going back to the lawsuit then goes on to describe what happened to John Doe, or what John Doe says happened to him. Mr. Combs' legendary white parties in the Hamptons were well known by many, including John Doe, the kind where countless celebrities would attend. In 1998, when John Doe was only 16 years old, he was recruited out of New York City and indeed, while residing in New York City, received an invitation to one of Combs' parties through a mutual connection. As John Doe made his way through the crowd toward the restroom, he unexpectedly bumped into Combs. Shocked, John Doe found himself face to face with Combs, a titan in the music industry, standing right in front of him in his own party. Doe took a picture with Combs at the 1998 party. Now, here's the thing. That picture is actually included in the lawsuit. John Doe, whose face is blurred out, is standing next to a smiling Sean Combs outside, clear as daylight. The lawsuit goes on to say that Combs took an interest in John Doe and wanted to talk to him. They walked to a more private area near the portable restrooms brought in for the party. There, John Doe told Combs he was a big fan of Combs and shared his dreams of becoming a star. Combs smiled, telling him he had potential and the look. When John Doe admitted his voice was not great, Combs assured him that did not matter. Combs made clear that the only thing that mattered was having the right look for the industry, and with it, Combs could transform Doe or anybody into a star. Combs abruptly told John Doe that he needed to drop his pants. John Doe, caught completely off guard, confusingly asked Combs to repeat himself. Combs made himself clear. He instructed John Doe to drop his pants and expose his penis so that Combs could inspect it, explaining it was a rite of passage and the route to becoming a star, and also as a way to prove himself. "Don't you want to break into the business?" Combs allegedly said. Doe immediately felt uncomfortable, froze, and did not know what to do. Combs remained calm and stood in front of him and stretched out his hand in a cupped position. Out of fear, anxiety, and the imbalanced power dynamic between himself and Combs, John Doe then dropped his pants and exposed his penis as Combs previously instructed. Now that point's really important because to anybody that would say this is consensual, and by the way, when you're talking with a minor, there is no such thing as consent, but generally speaking, that power dynamic becomes a key in sexual assault cases as well as sex trafficking cases. So that power dynamic, that fear, becomes a really, really big, important factor. But what does the lawsuit claim? The lawsuit claims that Combs groped this teenager, that he sexually assaulted him, apparently, by the way, without any concern that someone might walk nearby or see them. And by the way, when you think about that, if this were to go to trial, Combs could say, would he really do something like this in the open where anyone could observe this allegedly criminal behavior? The other way of looking at this, and I don't know if this would make its way into this kind of trial, remember what we all saw. Sean Combs in 2016 purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura in a hotel hallway while wearing a towel. If we want to talk about what's blatant and out in the open, is that not a pretty clear example of what he potentially is capable of or allegedly capable of. And by the way, he admitted that in an Instagram post 2 days after that video was released by CNN, basically said it was him. So if he would beat somebody in a kind of a public area like that, is it beyond the realm of possibility that he could do something like this? Again, very unrelated incidents, but something that I thought about as I was reading this lawsuit. Now, John Doe says that after several minutes, Combs walked away from this assault as if nothing had happened. The complaint reads, as a result of Combs' sexual assault onto John Doe while he was a minor, John Doe experienced damages, including pain and suffering, mental anguish, physical impairment, and emotional torment. The interaction continues to humiliate and cause shame on John Doe. Because of Combs' power and notoriety, plaintiff was afraid to report what had happened. John Doe became yet another sexual assault victim of Combs through the same pattern and abuse of influence Combs exercised over others previously. Now that's important because it goes to the argument of why now? If this goes to trial and this accuser testifies, you know he's going to be grilled about why he is coming out now to file this lawsuit. The allegation would be put forward by the defense, he's only doing this to jump on the bandwagon, that this isn't true, that he's just looking for a payday. Everybody else sued Sean Combs, why not do the same? But this assertion in this complaint suggests he was in fear. And that is a common theme from many accusers. We have seen it in a lot of different sexual assault cases, whether civil cases, criminal cases, that people do not come forward for a variety of reasons, and that can't necessarily be used against them. Sure, Sean Combs would have the opportunity to cross-examine this witness, goes to his credibility, totally fair game. But the other way of looking at it, we have a much different and deeper understanding of sexual assault today than maybe we did 10, 15 years ago. And remember here, the argument is, and we've seen this reflected in other lawsuits, that it took Cassandra Ventura and others to file their lawsuits, and especially now for Combs to be locked away in pretrial detention, for these people to feel safe to come forward with their own allegations. So we will see how that shakes up. Now, the lawsuit names one cause of action: violation of New York City's Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act. This is important. We've talked about the GMVA before. It has been cited as a cause of action in numerous prior lawsuits against Sean Combs. So John Doe's legal team argued why the GMVA would apply to this case. They write, the requirement that the crime of violence be committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due at least in part to be an animus based on the victim's gender is satisfied because defendant Combs forced plaintiff to engage in a sexual interaction without consent. John Doe could not effectively consent because of his age. The non-consensual sexual touching of a minor herein presented a serious risk of physical injury and, in fact, caused such injury. And by the way, there is now a look-back window to sue for these kinds of claims that would otherwise be time-barred. People can sue under this law until February 28th, 2025. That is why we are seeing a lot of these lawsuits. And by the way, another significant difference between this law and, let's say, the Adult Survivors Act in New York, which also created a look-back window to sue, but for specifically sexual assault claims, this Protection Act allows plaintiffs to recover not only damages, but also attorney's fees and costs, which can be quite significant. But what about the businesses associated with Combs? The lawsuit says, quote, the Combs business enabled Combs to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender by failing to, among other things, protect plaintiff from a known danger and or have sufficient policies and procedures in place to prevent sexual assault and or train their employees on identifying and preventing sexual assault. Given long-standing pattern and practice of committing sexual violence against minors who were boys, including on premises owned and or operated by defendants, the Combs corporations had and or should have had knowledge that Combs was a danger to plaintiff and did nothing to stop Combs. The Combs corporations further enabled Combs to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender by actively placing, maintaining, and or employing Combs in a position of power and authority, despite the fact that they knew and or should have known that Combs had a widespread and well-known practice of committing sexual assault and gender-motivated violence, including on premises owned and or operated by defendants. And as I mentioned before, we've seen this in other lawsuits. The defense would be that Combs wasn't acting within the scope of his employment. He wasn't engaged as an employee when this alleged conduct occurred. Therefore, how can you hold him liable? So we'll see again how that shakes up. Now, as I mentioned, Tony Buzbee's law firm filed lawsuits on behalf of 6 new clients on Monday. He expects many more to be on the horizon, which is, not good news for one of the richest men in hip hop. But as I said on a previous sidebar, it is possible, and we may see Sean Combs' legal teams fighting to stay or pause these civil lawsuits until the completion of the criminal case. So we'll see if that happens, and we'll also see what happens with new lawsuits as they potentially come up. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.